A very good evening, Los Angeles, and a good Friday to each and every one of you. I know that at the end of this week, the city and this country remains fragile and raw, stressed and joyous, hopeful and fearful, all at once. It's been a lot to contain as individuals, as a city, and collectively as a nation. And tonight I want to talk about those things, about our health crisis with COVID-19, which brought with it an economic crisis unprecedented in our lifetimes, a moment of racial justice and the advocacy for a true democracy for all, and of course, ongoing crises that we faced before this even started, such as homelessness in our city. You may be somebody who was out there in the protests, who felt the hope of this moment, who cried out to be listened to, who have joined a lifetime commitment now and a movement to bring about racial justice. You might be a city worker who's worked incredibly long hours in a new job at a shelter for people experiencing homelessness or out there keeping peace. You may be a student who in this last week had to graduate remotely or in a car, not have a prom, and who feels like you've lost this moment of your childhood which you waited so long for. Or you could be somebody who's a vulnerable senior, who's been stuck at home this entire time, who misses holding your grandchildren, being with your families, but who wants to protect them and yourself from the threat of COVID-19. There's still a lot of pain. But in the midst of this pain, there's also urgent work for us. Urgent work to take this moment and to meet it, not to miss it, to do what we can do both individually and privately, as well as publicly and together, to make sure this moment isn't lost, that we save as many lives as possible, that we rebuild as many livelihoods as possible, that we bring about racial justice for all Americans to heal this country, and that we get back to the business of continuing to make sure, whether it's traffic or homelessness, a warming earth or other things, that we do the work that we're called to in this time and in this generation. When George Floyd was murdered before our eyes, it sent us to a place of deep trauma, not a new trauma for African Americans and for Black Americans who have experienced too often firsthand what that trauma is in both small and great ways. In the ways that folks have their lives taken away from them by a knee to the neck, or in less visible ways, by being disproportionately living on our streets, more likely to die, in schools where they're less likely to get the education that we all deserve, and opportunities, doors that never open. I want to start tonight, though, with COVID-19, and then get to what we're doing to respond to that, talk about racial justice, and then speak about homelessness, which we had new numbers to update you on from this week. There's nothing easy or straightforward about this moment, but Angelenos are doing everything they can to save lives. It's a tense moment when it comes to our fight for COVID-19 because we've learned how to live with COVID-19 better, how to be safer, but there's also exhaustion, and some people are simply giving up, not wearing their masks, not physically distancing, saying, I can't take it anymore. But remember the victory that got us this day. Your work to save lives, to wash your hands, to keep a physical distance, to wear a facial covering. These have saved your neighbors, your family members, and we have to keep doing that even as the state and the county permits more things to be opened as ever before. As a reminder, we are updating our city's order to reflect the reopenings that are permitted by Los Angeles County, like other cities throughout the county have done. As of today, gyms and fitness centers, museums, aquariums, and galleries, as well as hotels and day camps and their pools, may safely reopen in Los Angeles. But as I always say in these briefings, just because you can open doesn't mean that you have to open. Take your time, do it right. In some cases, you may decide not to do so. But whether it's professional sports that can now resume without fans, camping allowed, film, TV, and music production that will resume, businesses do not need to reopen right away. When you do open, we are requiring you to follow certain health requirements to make sure that your customers and your workers, that you are safe. And as I remind folks, all of that is available, whether you're a business owner or an employee or a customer going to a business. You can find those rules and regulations and those suggested protocols at coronavirus.lacity.org/business. Physical distancing, proper hygiene like hand washing, temperature checks, wearing a face covering, all of these things are important tools. There's an estimate today that remember when we hit 100,000 deaths in America just a few weeks ago, that by the end of September we'll have 200,000 deaths. Think about all the pain and suffering that we experience at this point. In essence, they are projecting may very likely double. We need to be prepared to do everything we can to keep those numbers down while we await a permanent solution. Whether it's a therapeutical intervention or a vaccine, we have to have the only tools that we have be utilized by all of us. In LA County, one of those tools is testing. And anybody who has symptoms or doesn't have symptoms can get a free test still here in Los Angeles County at one of our 25 testing centers operated by the city and county, and another 63 operated at CVS pharmacies. Please go to coronavirus.lacity.org/testing to schedule at one of our city or county sites. And by the end of today, we'll have the capacity to test 20,600 people every single day to help you get back to work. If you've been protesting, to make sure that you didn't spread COVID-19 or get it. If you're somebody who has symptoms, of course, immediately make sure that it isn't COVID-19 so we can keep helping bend that curve. By the end of today, we will have tested approximately 676,000 Angelenos. That's up from just 581,000 last week. And the city is joining forces with the county, who's the lead agency, of course, on contact tracing. That way that we track people down who have been in contact with somebody who is now positive to make sure that they can quarantine. And more than 300 of our Los Angeles City employees will join forces with the marvelous workers who are part of the County Department of Public Health to make sure, as part of our Disaster Service Workers Program, that we can get each one of these cases to stop spreading to other people. Contact tracers will identify themselves if you get a call as county workers. And if you're diagnosed with COVID-19, you should expect a call from a public health specialist from LA County Public Health. These are not law enforcement agents. They will not ask about immigration status. They will only ask you who you've been in contact with so we can prevent more people from getting sick. It's simple, and we need your help when they call. If a member of the contact tracing team reaches out, it will identify on your phones as LA Public Health, and please answer. They will leave a message if you don't answer, and if you couldn't get it, do call them back. It could save lives. There are also scammers out there doing fake contact tracing, so please remember that official contact tracers will never ask you for your status, your immigration status, a social security number, or for money. Those are all signs that this is a scam, so beware. And it remains critical for us, one of the other tools when people do get sick, to make sure that we have hospital capacity, the beds and the equipment that we need to make sure we save lives. And along those front, let me update you where we are. In our general emergency hospitals, there are 790 beds available, including 665 acute care beds and 125 ICU beds available, and an inventory of 1,157 ventilators that we can use to treat COVID-19 and other respiratory disease. Today, the county reported 1,623 new cases. That brings our total number of diagnosed positive cases since this started to 70,476 in the county. That represents a 2% increase since yesterday. A week ago today, there were 1,445 new cases, and our total just at the end of last week was 60,000. So we've gone up 10,000 cases in a single week. The weekly case totals are sobering. As I mentioned, last week it was 9,740. This week, 9,665. 2 weeks in a row where we've added 10,000 diagnosed positive cases. Partially a reflection of how available our testing is, but partially that this continues to spread. In the city, we had 551 new cases today. That brings our total in the city of Los Angeles to 32,027 cases, a 2% increase. And last week, the same day, we had 624 new cases on Friday and a total of 28,297. And today, we learned about 20 deaths countywide. That brought our total deaths here in Los Angeles County from COVID-19 to 2,832, a 1% increase since yesterday. This week was slightly less deadly than last week, with 274 deaths in total this week, compared to 281 deaths the week before, but still a tragic number and one which we mourn the loss of all Angelenos. In this past week, 111 city residents died in the city of LA because of this virus, and we grieve with every family who has lost a loved one, whether it was this week or from the beginning of this crisis. We are so sorry for that loss, and I'll be sharing a story at the end of this about one of those lives we lost. We're also collectively grieving the lives lost due to racism in this country. We laid to rest in Houston next to the same mother he called out for as he died, George Floyd. And through his pain, we have all been called to take important steps forward, to listen and to act, to not just tinker, not do small things, but all of us to get outside of a comfort zone in private and public ways, to say this will be the moment which we do much more than the past, where we fundamentally reimagine and rethink some of the ways that we can make this country safe, healthy, and prosperous for everyone, We can't just grieve. We need to grow. We need this to be a transformative moment, an inflection point in our history that gives us a new opportunity to say who we are and how we make people safe and prosperous. A place where peaceful demonstrations do not amount to an idle instance of anger and grief or pain, but the first seeds of a more just and equitable, a more fair future. We have a chance, Los Angeles, and we have a chance, America, to translate passion into progressive reforms, into policies that will save lives, not just in, but notably in policing, but also in our economy and in our health and education systems, the places where racism lives just as violently as we see in other sectors of our society, claiming lives, shortening lives, lessening lives. That cannot be acceptable to any of us. In the City of Angels, we are confronting this moment. Today, we took a big step forward as our city's first ever meeting of our brand new Commission on Civil and Human Rights was conducted. And I'm grateful to the commissioners who are unpaid civilians who've stepped up to this moment as part of our new Department of Civil and Human Rights, and the executive director of this department, who you heard from earlier this week, Capri Maddox, for starting their critical work to protect anyone who lives in, works in, or visits our city from discrimination. And you have my commitment to keep taking broad and bold steps forward with our budget, with our policies, and we have to be more ambitious than just the city, with how we look at what we demand this nation and our state and county governments across America do to meet the moment through the healthcare systems, the welfare systems, the housing policies, the mental health care systems, the educational programs that we have or don't have, but that we demand. We have to change how we spend public dollars and how LAPD officers engage with communities they are sworn to protect and serve. We have to ensure we open more doors to more people with opportunities, just as we did when we raised the minimum wage and made community college free. And we also need to make progress in an intersection of both our economic woes and our racial woes, that of our crisis of homelessness and housing. And tonight it's a pleasure to be joined by two leaders in this fight, Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority Executive Director Heidi Marston, as well as Kirkpatrick Tyler, who is the Director of Skid Row Strategy, the first ever in our city's history, in our Office of City Homeless Initiatives. And I'm going to turn it over to them in a moment. So let me talk to you about homelessness, because this has been an important week. This is a crisis that persists. And 2 years ago, I called for a FEMA-like level response. And thankfully, because one of the only silver linings I can find in our COVID-19 crisis is that the federal government stepped up and said we could begin to house people with federal reimbursement for 3/4 of this in hotels and motel rooms, in shelters. We could take more people off the streets more quickly than we ever have before. And that's exactly what we're doing. Our homelessness crisis persists. It's caused by so many things, but it's basically trauma meets high rent. When we don't build enough housing, build enough affordable housing, when people get displaced or moved from communities, combined with the traumas of veterans coming home from war, and women who've experienced violence, and young people who have gone through the foster care system, and addiction and mental health gone undiagnosed and untreated. We've seen this problem across not just Los Angeles and California, but across our nation. In those cities that are quote unquote most successful, where housing becomes the most expensive, it becomes even worse. I've been working on this problem since I was 14 years old as a volunteer, just footsteps away from here on Skid Row. But today the numbers tell us that it's gotten worse, at least by this January of this year. The numbers that came out in our point-in-time count from this January said that we had a 13.6% increase in homelessness in the city of Los Angeles, a 12.7% increase across Los Angeles County. Remember, these numbers were before the work since January, well before we've brought thousands of unhoused Angelenos indoors as COVID-19 has approached and been here. And while this jump was smaller than last year's jump, and it's under what the state's increase was last year too, we also have some good news, and I want to thank, as I do, the people who actually are part of this system, who work for agencies and the Homeless Services Authority, the county and the city, who day in and day out have those conversations and wellness checks, who treat this as the public health crisis that it is, and now who have helped us house more than 23,000 Angelenos in a single year, twice as many as we were doing collectively just 5 years ago. And our spending tells a clear story. Several years ago, we were spending virtually nothing in the city budget on homelessness, relying just on some dollars to come from the federal government, some services to come from the county. We've gone from nothing in our current budget, and I know there's been a lot of focus on our city budget. Why aren't we spending it on people? Why aren't we spending it on human services? Why aren't we spending it on homelessness? This year, we'll spend nearly $430 million on homelessness. And if you take into account the money that we've lobbied for Sacramento and Washington to bring us, to match that will, to match that urgency, to step up to this moment, we will dedicate $679 million, where there was none before, to the fight against homelessness here in Los Angeles, with housing, with healing, and with hope. With these unprecedented investments, we've begun to see some results. 2 years ago, when we had our point-in-time count, we had 25% of our homeless population in shelter. This year, that jumped significantly to 30%. 5% may seem small, but that is thousands of people in shelter that were on our streets before. It means our shelter system is adding beds. And you've heard me talk about this. You know my passion for this. By August, we will have built 24 new shelters that didn't exist just 2 years ago, with 1,800 beds built in the last 18 months, and 13 of them open right now. By the end of the year, that will be 26. And we're building permanent supportive housing thanks to the voters. It took time to find the plots of land to start building, but we have 106 total apartments online and another 2,327 under construction as I speak to you tonight in this address. And nearly 150 projects are either open or in the pipeline, representing almost 10,500 units of housing that weren't in Los Angeles altogether. We've also funded and hired more than 800 outreach workers, these angels in the City of Angels, who I want to thank again. They do some of the hardest work. And as we think about what public safety means, and when people have said, let's not just put all this on the shoulders of a police system, that's exactly what we've been doing before this moment and this crisis, saying that we need to actually have folks who are social workers, housing navigators, mental health professionals, substance abuse counselors, who can help address the needs on the streets instead of just hoping that there's a law enforcement answer to something that is a social problem. All of this work is essential, but it's not enough. A year ago, I said that we had to treat homelessness, 2 years ago, like the emergency that it is. And as I said, it took the COVID-19 pandemic for the federal government to unlock some of those dollars. But it speaks to another key point that we have to remember, that this point in time snapshot is just that, a point in time in January. And times have changed dramatically since we conducted this in January. With the coronavirus, our lives have shifted in fundamental ways, and so has the outlook of our homelessness efforts as we accelerate them. With FEMA dollars, we've placed more than 3,700 of our most vulnerable people experiencing homelessness into 35 hotels and motels across the county through Project Room Key. We're the most successful county in the state so far. We've called over 800, probably by now close to 900 hotels and motels, and we're going to keep on pushing. We also converted our recreation centers and housed over 1,300 people in shelter through our city's rec centers, and nearly 300 high-risk Angelenos experiencing homelessness are now in trailers provided by the state. We raised our hand. Great folks from our Rec and Parks Department, our police department, and many other disaster service workers, together with LASA and county workers, stood that up and made that happen. Thank you for saving lives. Altogether, we've brought nearly 6,000 people indoors during COVID-19 response. And now our goal must be to make sure they don't go back outdoors when this is done, that we keep them off the streets. In the course of getting more folks inside, our shelter and testing efforts have also helped prevent widespread outbreaks in the homeless community. Remember at the beginning of this crisis when that was both Dr. Ferrer's, mine, and other people's greatest fear? We sent street teams, which are medical teams, right to encampments where people are in our city to screen for symptoms and to do wellness checks. The fire department has operated a high-capacity testing site in Skid Row that's tested nearly 2,000 Angelenos experiencing homelessness so far. And we forged a partnership with UCLA and everyone living in a city rec center or a state-issued trailer to provide them with the care they need. And because we've seen the economic devastation that's been wrought by this pandemic, because we know we have to do everything possible to get ahead of the next wave of homelessness if we can, we're looking at what really this point in time count told us. We're very successful in getting more and more people housed, but more and more people were becoming homeless in the LA County. So on March 15th, Los Angeles became the first city in California to put a moratorium on evictions. We supported vulnerable tenants by freezing rents for the more than 624,000 rent-stabilized units in our city. Back in early May, City Attorney Mike Feuer and I launched a new pro bono effort called LA Represents to match tenants with free legal assistance when the courts open and eviction proceedings are allowed to happen again. And 2 weeks ago, I joined together with Council President Nuri Martinez, where we jointly announced with members of the City Council a $100 million pledge to be the largest rental assistance fund in the United States to help keep renters in their homes and to help keep landlords meeting their mortgages. And today, I wrote a letter to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of California, urging the Judicial Council to keep the state's eviction moratorium in place to further protect tenants. None of this is easy. None of this is uncontroversial. But leadership demands that we step forward in these moments. It's absolutely vital to addressing homelessness and housing insecurity in our city. To solve homelessness, it requires a hard truth written in the heart of today's LASA report on the number of folks that are homeless. Institutional racism is a leading cause of homelessness in Los Angeles. In Los Angeles County, where 8 to 9% of the population is African American, a third of all people experiencing homelessness are Black. Today's homelessness against Black Angelenos is a direct product of redlining, of the programs that happened after World War II to help GIs get households or to buy their first home that Black soldiers couldn't get, racist covenants, discrimination, and unconscious bias in our systems and institutions and our banking. It's a stunning figure when you look at that gap between the number of Black Angelenos and the number of people experiencing homelessness who are Black. But it isn't news to many of us, and we didn't awaken to it the last 2 weeks. In fact, last year we became the first city in America to set up an ad hoc committee on Black people experiencing homelessness. And we released a report in which it laid out clearly the overrepresentation of Black Angelenos on our streets, which leaves us with a clear and unmistakable mission. This is where these things come together. If we care about health and we care about livelihood, if we care about this moment of racial justice and ending homelessness, to bring down the number of homeless Angelenos, we have to reinvigorate our focus on housing Black Angelenos. It starts with the ideas that we already have. The ad hoc committee laid out a list of recommendations about what we can do to address homelessness, housing insecurity, and poverty in the African American community. And alongside our partners in the county and at LASA, we have to accelerate those recommendations now, some of which we've already started, again, long before this moment on our streets and in our country. And we've taken those steps, and you'll hear about those more in a moment. But first, let me turn over the microphone to the executive director of the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, somebody who I got to know when we worked together to reduce veterans' homelessness by over 80% in Los Angeles County, who stepped up to perhaps the greatest and most difficult challenge of our city and our county to try to end homelessness in Los Angeles, and I'm so grateful for her leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, Heidi Marston.
Good evening. I'm Heidi Marston, LAHSA's Executive Director. This year's point in time count shows us numbers that are unacceptably high for our homeless population in Los Angeles. We know that homelessness was a crisis long before COVID-19, and the upcoming numbers that we'll talk about represent a snapshot of what homelessness looked like in January, but we know that the world looks very different than it did in January. A global pandemic through COVID-19 reminded us that we can make progress much faster than we ever thought possible with the resources, the will, and the teamwork that it takes to move people indoors, and since March have brought more than 6,000 people from the sidewalk inside. I want to be very clear that homelessness is a byproduct of racism. We continue to see that Black people are overrepresented in our homeless population, and that Black African Americans are 4 times more likely to become homeless than their white counterparts. Racism is woven into the fabric of every safety net in our system nationwide. If we want to see homelessness go down, we have to address racism upstream and across the country. We use the homeless count as a tool, but it's not the only tool that we have. I'm new in my role, but I am committed to holding myself and my team accountable for continuing to improve the effectiveness of our system, enhancing our data systems and reporting tools so we can make more real-time data-informed decisions, and to continue to hold up the truth that behind every number, every methodology, every percentage point is a person, a life, and a story that matters and should be told. To that end, we continue to perform better year over year as a system, showing that the number of people who have come indoors just this last year has significantly increased. We have prevented more than 6,000 people from falling into homelessness during last year, and more than 22,000 people moved into permanent housing, permanently resolving their homelessness. Given the fallout of the pandemic and the systemic racism that has led to Black people being heavily overly represented among people experiencing homelessness, it's clear that we need big systemic changes in our housing supply, our economy, our healthcare system, our legal systems, and many more, to advance racial justice and to stem the inflow into homelessness. LAHSA is committed to thinking bigger and bolder, and we will not stop until all of our unhoused Angelenos are brought home.
Thank you, Heidi. I'll go from here so we don't have to get a double cleaning. Next, I'd like to ask Kirkpatrick Tyler, who heads up our Skid Row initiatives in our city's Homelessness Initiatives Office. The first person to hold this title, for all of us who know and love him, knows KP, and he's done an extraordinary job in a place that for decades has embodied the failure of Los Angeles to address homelessness and America, our Skid Row, something that we hope that we can rewrite the chapter of. KP?
Good evening. As the mayor said, my name is Kirkpatrick Tyler. I serve as the director for Skid Row Strategy in the mayor's office of City Homeless Initiatives. Today's homeless counts results shows us one more time that structural racism is one of the leading causes of homelessness in Los Angeles. So now it's time to have a tough conversation. And it's probably a conversation we should have been having a long time ago. But if we wait any longer to have it, the cost will become even greater than it is, and probably too great. This is a conversation about Black lives and Black people. Because throughout the history of this country, and very loudly over the last 4 months, the impact of COVID-19, the challenges of the policing and justice system in America, and the scourge of homelessness and the impact on Black people at a higher rate and a more devastating rate than any other group. So we have to have some tough conversations right now. But we can't just leave it at conversations. We can't just leave it at talk. We also need to do some work, provide extensive funding, resources, and reparations. In December of 2018, the Ad Hoc Committee on Black People Experiencing Homelessness put forth a report highlighting the deep and crushing impact of inequity, racism, and bias at every level of our homeless service system. Along with this report, they included 67 recommendations to address both systemic and tangible barriers that contribute to the increasing number of Black Angelenos experiencing homelessness. Our work going forward is to implement those recommendations laid out in the report. Here in the mayor's office, we've begun to realize some of this work through our Project 100 initiative. Project 100 is a pilot funded through our state HEAP funding. Project 100 aims to house 100 Black women living in Skid Row to bring them off the streets and place them in permanent housing, provide them with critical supportive services, and address key challenges inside of our homeless service system, and provide cultural awareness and trauma-informed care training for service providers from the executive level all the way to the person that greets them at the front door. So far, through the work of Project 100, we've been able to place women experiencing homelessness in Skid Row into permanent housing using rapid rehousing dollars. We've employed lived experience consultants, meaning women who have experienced homelessness or are currently experiencing homelessness at some point themselves in order to guide us through this important work. Because what the report tells us is that bureaucrats and leaders can't just go and do the work, that we actually have to be listening to the folks that are living and experiencing homelessness right now. We've also been able to work with our permanent supportive housing providers and LASA to increase the number of and the speed of our housing placements for the most vulnerable. We've instituted plans for cultural awareness and trauma-informed care training for all of our service providers. We've coordinated strategic systems prioritization for Skid Row Project 100 participants for housing placement. We've worked with LASA to address structural bottlenecks that contribute to the delay in housing placements through the coordinated entry system. And we've even begun identifying biases in the vulnerability index, service prioritization decision assistance tool, or better known as the VI-SPDAT. Project 100 is fully informed and developed based on the recommendations of the ad hoc report. And it is the first step in turning the report into actionable, implementable results. The ad hoc report represents the types of tools that we need to be guiding our conversations. Project 100 is the type of work that we need to be doing in order to bring change to our city. And now is the time that we take bold action, because otherwise it'll be too late. And so I encourage you to join us in this fight, to speak up for the people that can't speak for themselves, and let's work together to make this city better. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi and Kirkpatrick, very much for joining the briefing tonight. And I hope all of you can look at ways you can redouble those efforts to help us in places and organizations across the city, from LA Family Housing to the Downtown Women's Center to PATH and so many others. And I apologize for only naming 3 because there's a good dozen plus organizations that are our partners in the work that we're doing and who wear a racial equity lens, something that we must insist in all of our public policy moving forward. Lives are so precious. We said this from the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, that we have to treat every life as something sacred. And as we bring unhoused neighbors in to safety and to shelter, we do that because we believe that their lives are worth saving, and that each one of us is called to make sure we do everything we can, whether it's addressing the way that racial inequity kills, the way that economic inequality kills, the way that unfair policing can kill, and the way that we have a homelessness crisis that kills. But we also know that we're in the midst of a crisis that has been taking too many lives from us because of COVID-19. And I'd like to close tonight by telling you about an incredible angel, a fallen angel here in the city of Los Angeles, Shirley Gershon. She died on May 22nd, 2 weeks before she would have turned 96 years old. A lot of people have talked about how this crisis just affects seniors, as if seniors aren't as beautiful and precious, as wise and as important as a newborn baby, and they are. Shirley's children must have understood that this could be her last birthday, but their hearts, of course, were not ready for this loss. How could they ever be? Because we're never ready to lose someone we love, and Shirley was well loved. She was warm, she was outgoing, she was generous, the kind of person you can't but help love. That might be why Harry Gershon told her he was going to marry her on their very first date. But before he got the chance, the youngest of his 4 children asked Shirley if she'd be her mother, and Shirley said yes to both. Both proposals, and then she settled easily into her new life, living in the San Fernando Valley as a wife and a mother in Encino. She loved to play tennis, she loved to entertain, and above all, she loved her family, who we hold in our hearts tonight. She's survived by her daughters Sherry, Robin, and Debbie, and predeceased by her husband of 43 years, Harry, and son Roger. May her family know comfort in these dark days, and may her memory be a blessing to us all. We've been tested, we've been tried a lot in these past few days, weeks, and months. But Angelenos are strong and resilient, and this is a city unlike any other. Its strength is on our streets. Its strength is in us staying at home. Its strength is around us in acts of generosity, and if even at the most painful moments, believing that we can find common ground and the demand that we each play our part in moving our city forward. We will get through this moment, but I call on all of you not just to get through a moment, but to give it meaning, to not just save lives, but to end racism, not just to get livelihoods back, but to rebuild a much fairer economy, to make sure we do the things to look back on this chapter, not as a chapter of survival and resilience, but of hope and of transformation. I said we'd never stop working for you in the midst of this crisis, and we haven't. Even as one crisis turned to 2 and 2 to 3, and crises like homelessness that predate and will post-date this require us to continue. We will never stop caring, never stop listening, and never stop working to make this a city of angels. So on this Friday night, I wish everybody peace and strength, love and justice in our days ahead. Let's keep walking through these fires together. Thank you. With that, I'm happy to answer questions. I'll take the first question.
Our first question comes from the line of Dakota Smith with LA Times. Please go ahead.
Good evening, Dakota.
Good evening, Mayor. Looking back on the last 2 weeks and the city's response to the protests and then subsequent announcements you made about cutting the LAPD budget, from my point of view as a reporter, one thing that really struck me is that there were some moments where a really diverse bunch of groups were really angry at you, something I hadn't seen before in all the time of covering City Hall. And I'm just sort of curious about that. I mean, what do you chalk that up to, that you had this diverse group frustrated with you and not happy with what you were doing? And is there anything that you would have done differently, looking back, maybe specifically the curfews, the National Guard, the police, the protests? I guess on sort of a broader question, as the sort of Fairfaxing was unfolding, did you sort of realize the sort of national wave that was happening at that moment, which took some people, and probably, reporters too, longer to realize?
Well, thank you, Dakota. No, I've come to know as a mayor and talking to mayors across this country, we're in many ways kind of prisms to refract the feelings of our cities. In moments of celebration where people celebrate with you, and in moments of frustration where it's our job to hear those frustrations, even when they're directed directly at you. Governments and systems are made up of millions of people, but leadership has its responsibilities. And from the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, or whether we're dealing with the crisis of racial justice in America, always try to honestly meet those. Stand up for them, listen, no matter how angry some of the voices are. That's not new to this. It was almost 2 years ago in Venice that people yelled at me about building homeless shelters, and you have to listen to those words, not necessarily dismiss them just because you don't like how they're being delivered. It's tough as a human being, but it's necessary as a leader. In terms of what we did, I think there's so much that Los Angeles can be proud of, and I never claim singular credit for that. I'm just the mayor. When I see people wearing masks and saving lives in hospitals, stepping up to volunteer in testing centers, or going out to protest for racial justice and equity, getting involved in learning budgets and pushing for changes, to me, that actually, maybe perversely, makes me incredibly happy, Because as I said, this is a moment we've been waiting for. And in a personal term, this is a moment I've been waiting for. My whole life has been dedicated to greater human rights and economic opportunity. It's why I pursued a path that I knew would never be easy, but absolutely necessary. And each one of us can choose how to do that in our workplace, if you're in the private sector, how you can do that in your community, bring justice in your family, work for health and greater economic opportunity. And long after I'm mayor, these questions will still be here. The only question we have to answer is, what do we do at this moment? And there's plenty of time to review, but I'm too busy pushing forward, looking at how we can be brave and reframe our budget, how we can take resources, whether they come from our existing budget and existing departments, including our police department, or whether they come from other funds that we could use to maybe just meet our fiscal needs, but that wouldn't meet our racial needs, and wouldn't meet our justice needs, and wouldn't meet our housing needs. And I'm really proud to serve alongside other people that share those values on our city council. It's never going to be enough for some. I've known that since I stepped into public service nearly 19 years ago. And for others, it's always too much. But you have to keep your morals. And at this moment, I think all of our morality says we have to stretch beyond our grasp. We have to reach for more. We have to volunteer longer. We have to work harder. And I'm very pleased to see that not just happening in the incredible people I work with in my office, our city employees, but the people out there who are going day after day to protest to say enough is enough is enough. And the last part that you asked about this national moment, I think I felt that from the very beginning. Clearly, the COVID-19 is an international moment, a global moment, but also a national moment saying, who are we? And as a nation, do we care enough about each other to say, hey, getting masks and people dying is your responsibility, or we as a nation will come together to solve those things? When it comes to racial justice, it's the same thing. In the past, it has been about just Los Angeles. Why is Los Angeles so racist? Why did Rodney King get beat up? What's happening on the streets of LA? This moment, we know that it includes Los Angeles. We still have incidents of racism all the time in Los Angeles, every day. Talk to anybody who's a Black Angelino, they wear that burden every single day. And so we have to listen to that, but also know that we're not alone, that there are more people who look different from each other, of different ages, all coming together to demand that the change come forward. I'm proud to be a part of that movement and to continue stretching beyond our grasp. Take the next question. I just got a note saying there was no more. All right. So let me then turn to Spanish. Thank you to everybody who has tuned in. Thank you again to Kirkpatrick and Heidi. And I will, as always, give my address now in Spanish. Thank you to everybody else. Have a good, a safe weekend, and keep on pushing. Muy buenas tardes, Los Ángeles. En los últimos 3 meses hemos pasado por una serie de crisis difíciles. Una crisis de salud pública, otra económica, y después una crisis de justicia racial. Y entre todos siempre hemos tenido la crisis de indigencia. Hoy quisiera hablar sobre todas. Les recuerdo que empezando hoy, los gimnasios, museos, galerías, zoológicos y acuarios, al igual que hoteles y campamentos juntos con sus piscinas, pueden abrir de nuevo en la ciudad y el condado de Los Ángeles. La experiencia será diferente. Todos deben practicar la sana distancia y llevar coberturas faciales. Además, se permiten deportes profesionales sin espectadores y el acampar. Y se permite la producción cinematográfica de música y de televisión. Les recuerdo que negocios no están obligados a abrir ahora. Visita por más información y protocolos muy importantes por su negocio a coronavirus.lacity.org/business para ver pautas de cómo hacerlo de manera segura y para encontrar estos protocolos requeridos por el condado. No hay nada fácil en este momento, pero angelinos están haciendo nuestra parte para mantener a todos protegidos. En el condado de Los Ángeles, todos se pueden hacer una prueba gratis de COVID-19, aunque tengan síntomas o no. Inscríbase para una cita en la página coronavirus.lacity.org/testing. Y nuestra ciudad se está uniendo con el condado para ofrecer más rastreo de contactos para frenar el brote. Este es crítico en nuestra lucha contra el COVID-19. Los trazadores de contactos se identifican como empleados del condado. Si lo diagnosticaron como positivo del COVID-19, debe esperar una llamada de estos especialistas del Departamento de Salud Pública del Condado de Los Ángeles. Estas personas no son agentes de policía. No le preguntarán sobre su estatus migratorio. Solo le preguntan con quién ha tenido contacto para que podamos evitar que se enfermen más personas y ayudarle a sus contactos mejor entender cómo mantenerse seguro y cómo obtener ayuda. Simplemente es esto. Si alguien de este equipo se pone en contacto con usted, el contacto LA Public Health aparecerá en su teléfono. Por favor, responde. Hay personas intentando defraudar al público con rastreo de contactos falso. Entonces, por favor, recuerdo que los trazadores de contactos oficiales nunca le preguntarán sobre su estatus, ni por su número de seguridad social, ni por dinero. Ten cuidado. En nuestros hospitales tenemos 790 camas disponibles. Entre ellas, 125 están en las unidades de cuidados intensivos y tenemos 1,157 respiradores disponibles. Hoy hubieron 1,633 nuevos casos en el condado de Los Ángeles, llegando a un total de 70,476. Y en la ciudad de Los Ángeles tuvimos 551 nuevos casos, llegando a un total de 32,207. Y hoy supimos del fallecimiento de 20 personas más en el condado, llegando a un total de 2,832 muertes. Lloramos con todos quienes han perdido a un ser querido. Y junto con nuestra nación también estamos pasando el dolor de la muerte de George Floyd mientras enfrentamos los desafíos para acabar con el racismo estructural. Hoy tomamos un gran paso adelante con la primera reunión de nuestra Comisión de Derechos Civiles y Humanos. Y estoy agradecido a nuestros comisionados y a nuestra director ejecutiva, Capri Maddox, por empezar este trabajo crítico para proteger a todos en Los Ángeles de discriminación. Este es una de nuestras armas más poderosas en esta lucha contra el racismo. Pero también nuestra crisis de indigencia continúa. Hoy los números nos cuentan que espero que antes. El conteo anual de personas sin hogar nos dice que nuestra ciudad tiene más de 41,000 personas sin hogar, un aumento de 13,6% del año pasado. Sin embargo, la tasa del aumento es más baja que la del año pasado, cuando subió el 16%, y es menos del el porciento en el estado de California. Nuestros gastos muestran la prioridad que le hemos dado a esta crisis. Hace muchos años casi no gastamos a nada en la indigencia. En este presupuesto estamos gastando casi $430 millones. Este es el aumento más grande en mi presupuesto durante mi tiempo como su alcalde. Hay muchas voces, especialmente ahora, que necesitamos más dinero en nuestra ciudad por servicios humanos. Este es un ejemplo de esta campaña, este trabajo y esta visión. Y si contamos con el dinero de Sacramento y Washington, D.C., estamos dedicando $700 millones, un récord ahora a la vivienda y en ayudar a nuestros vecinos sin hogar en Los Ángeles. Con estas inversiones hemos visto resultados. En años recientes alojábamos a cerca del 25% de nuestra población sin hogar y el 75% en las calles. Este año hemos ajustado al 30% de nuestra población sin hogar, en refugios y en la vivienda. Para el final de julio hemos construido 24 nuevos refugios en la ciudad de Los Ángeles, con más de 1,800 nuevas camas sobre los últimos 18 meses, con 13 abiertos ahora. Nuestros esfuerzos tienen un impacto amplio. Estamos ajustando a 23,000 angelinos cada año, 2 veces más que hace 5 años. Pero aún no es suficiente. En mi opinión, necesitamos hacer más. Hace un año dije que necesitábamos enfrentar la indigencia como la emergencia que lo es, y solamente con la pandemia del COVID-19 se dio cuenta el gobierno federal que debería de darnos una respuesta adecuada. Finalmente tenemos los fondos a nivel del gobierno federal que necesitamos. En total hemos alojado a 6,000 personas sin hogar en nuestra respuesta al COVID-19. Esto es increíble y gracias a los trabajadores, los miembros del departamentos como Recreación y Parques, del Departamento de Policía y otras que estamos trabajando muy duro a traer más y más y más personas en estos refugios. Y nuestra meta es de asegurar que estos vecinos no regresen a las calles después de COVID-19. Mientras solamente el 9% de nuestros residentes del condado son afroamericanos, al menos uno entre 3 angelinos sin hogar lo son. El Comité Especial sobre la Gente Afroamericana en Indigencia ofreció una lista de recomendaciones sobre qué podemos hacer para enfrentar la indigencia, la inseguridad de vivienda y la pobreza en la comunidad afroamericana. Tenemos que implementar estas recomendaciones. Ya hemos tomado algunos pasos antes de esta crisis de justicia racial en nuestras calles. Aun si la indigencia no ha estado en la frente del público durante los últimos 3 meses, sigue siendo la crisis moral y humanitaria de nuestro tiempo. En mi opinión, es la crisis de nuestra vida. Seguimos adelante, hermanos y hermanas, y quédense protegidos, quédense en buena salud, quédense en esta lucha contra el racismo y cuando puedan, quédense en casa. Mucha fuerza, mucho amor, mucha justicia por Los Ángeles. Gracias y buenas noches. Thank you all and have a good evening.